He told his wife, "We don't need children." She walked out without a word. 5 years later, he saw her with 2 identical children, and they had his eyes. The sun began to set over the city skyline, casting a golden glow on the glass walls of the penthouse. Inside, the home was silent, save for the clinking of ice in a whiskey glass and the distant hum of a fountain in the inner courtyard. John Deniz, a man of great stature, stood by the window, his reflection barely visible against the darkening sky. His tailored suit fit his robust figure, immaculate as always, but his posture betrayed a deep tension that was coiled beneath the surface. Behind him, Marina approached the living room entrance. Her light brown hair was pulled back loosely, and her gentle eyes held a mix of sadness and disbelief. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her head, trying to find the perfect moment, the right words, the least painful tone. But none of it mattered now. The moment had arrived, and it burned like acid. "I want to try," she said softly. "We've built a life, John, a beautiful life, but it's empty without children. I want to grow this family. I need it." John didn't turn to look at her. His hand tightened around the glass, and for a long sequence of seconds, silence filled the space between them. Finally, his voice cut through the air, low, sharp, and absolute. "Children? No, we don't need them." "We don't!" The words landed like bricks. Marina blinked, stunned. Her chest seized as if she'd been punched. Her hands trembled slightly, and she forced herself to speak despite the feeling of her throat closing. "What do you mean we don't need them? You said before that—" "Maybe, someday." "That was then," he retorted, turning to face her now. His eyes, a glacial, penetrating blue, held no warmth. "Before I realized how fragile this is, this company, this reputation, this life. Do you think I built all of this to mess it up with diapers, crying, and sleepless nights? I can't be a father. I won't be." Marina stared at him, bewildered by how quickly he had turned cold. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This wasn't about money. Not for her. She had loved him when he was just an ambitious young man, with big ideas and no capital. But now he stood in front of her like a stranger, someone who measured worth in stock options and control, not in joy or love or hope. "So that's it," she whispered. "You choose your empire over your own family." "No," he shot back coldly. "I choose this life. Don't call it a family if you insist on this." For a moment she didn't move. She just stood there, absorbing the finality of what he had said. Her lip trembled, but she straightened her shoulders and picked up her coat from the back of a chair. As she walked to the front door, her steps were slow, deliberate. He didn't follow her, didn't call her back. And then she was gone. John remained by the window long after the sun had vanished, his whiskey untouched. Outside, the city came to life with lights. But inside the house, everything was dark. He didn't move. He didn't speak. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, handsome, powerful, and alone. The afternoon air in downtown was a mix of freshly cut flowers and expensive perfume. The rooftop garden was filled with elegantly dressed guests, laughing, toasting, murmuring about charity, stock options, and who had just flown in from where. It was one of those fundraising galas that John used to avoid. But lately, he had been to more of them, not because of the photos or the publicity, but because they were a distraction. Carefully orchestrated events that allowed him to feel enough motion to forget how still and empty his life had become. John stood near the edge of the terrace with a champagne flute in his hand, nodding politely to an investor he barely remembered meeting. The man was talking about a new AI startup or a mining company in Peru. John wasn't really listening. His eyes drifted over the man's shoulder, scanning the crowd. not for anyone in particular, just out of habit. It was then that he saw her. It wasn't gradual. It was immediate, as if he had been punched in the stomach without warning. She was standing in the center of the garden, laughing softly at something someone had said. Her dress was simple, a deep green, elegant but understated. Her hair was longer now, pulled into a soft chignon, and her skin caught the fading sunlight in a way that made her look almost unreal. But it was her. Marina. John's chest tightened before his brain had even fully accepted the sight of her. He hadn't seen her in 5 years. He had thought of her, often late at night, when the silence of the house became too loud. But this was different. This wasn't a memory. This was her. Here. Present. And she wasn't alone. There were 2 children with her, identical, small hands clutching each of hers as she knelt to adjust the collar of one of their shirts. They were laughing. She was smiling in a way John hadn't seen in years. Something in his body began to hum. The children couldn't have been more than 5 years old. They had dark brown hair, messy in that natural way only little kids can manage. Their skin was fair, their laughter light and natural. But what stopped John in his tracks, what made the world around him turn dull and irrelevant, were their eyes. Both of them, a piercing, startling blue. His blue. John's fingers loosened, and the champagne flute tilted slightly before he steadied the sudden movement, drawing a glance from a nearby waiter. He put the glass down, untasted. His heart was pounding now, each beat louder than the last. He had no doubt, not even a question. He was looking at his sons. They weren't just similar to him. They were echoes. His jawline, his nose, his eyes. It was like seeing a split photograph of his childhood self, multiplied by 2 and brought to life. Marina didn't see him right away. She was focused on the children, gently picking cookie crumbs off one of their shirts, while the other tugged on her arm, pointing at a gigantic ice sculpture of a swan. John took a step forward without realizing it, almost as if he were being pulled by gravity. But then she looked up. Her eyes met his. The moment froze. Her body went rigid. She stood up slowly, and for a second, her smile wavered. Something unreadable passed over her face, shock, pain, maybe even guilt. But then she clutched the boy's hands tighter and turned away, walking quickly toward the exit. John didn't move, didn't follow her, not right away. His mind was spinning so fast he felt it might catch fire. The questions flooded him. When? How? Why hadn't she told him? Did she plan on disappearing? Was she trying to protect them from him? And what had he done? What had he become for her to believe she had to? But beneath all the confusion, a truth beat like a drum in his soul. Those children were his, and for the first time in years, something cracked open inside him. A need deeper than instinct, a yearning more powerful than regret. He had spent 5 years convincing himself that children were not part of his path. But now he saw it with clarity. His path had already led to them. He had simply refused to look. The laughter around him seemed distant now, separated from reality. The skyline glittered behind him, and a waiter brushed past with a tray of appetizers. But John no longer belonged in that moment. His world had shifted in a single heartbeat, and nothing he had built, no company, no deal, no amount of money, could compare to what had just walked away from him, hand in hand with the woman he had once loved and the 2 lives he never knew he had created. As the night fell over the city, John remained on that terrace, frozen between memory and revelation, wondering how long he had been blind to what truly mattered, and if it was already too late to find his way back. What do you think Marina felt when she saw John? And how do you think she'll react now? The next morning, John was sitting in a corner of his office, Not at his desk where he usually reigned like a general overseeing an empire, but on the low leather couch, his elbows on his knees, his eyes bloodshot, and his gaze distant. His tie was loose around his neck, and the coffee on the table in front of him had gone cold hours ago. He hadn't slept, not for a moment. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed their faces, those two children, the curve of their jaws, the blue fire of their eyes. His eyes. He had spent the entire night reliving the gala over and over in his mind, analyzing every detail, every glance, the smile on Marina's face when she looked at them, the way the kids moved beside her, the way they laughed as if they had no weight on their shoulders. He couldn't understand how he hadn't known, how she had hidden this, how she had managed to disappear so completely, to erase herself from his world and raise two sons who were undeniably his. By 9 a.m., he had made the call. He didn't even hesitate. There were only two people in his life he trusted with personal and delicate investigations. One of them was Andre Fernandez, a retired intelligence officer who now worked as a private detective. John gave him the names and every detail he could remember from the night before. Marina Santos, formerly Marina da Silva, last known address 5 years ago, possible new address unknown, twin boys approximately 5 years old. He didn't tell Andre everything, not yet, but the implication was clear. This wasn't just curiosity. This was urgent. John didn't bother with business that day. He canceled meetings, postponed briefings, and ignored calls from board members. His assistant, who had worked with him for over a decade and knew his temperament well, didn't question it. He simply closed the door and told the staff not to disturb him. By late afternoon, the first report came in. Andre was fast. He always was. He had already located Marina's current address, a modest house on a quiet street in a nearby neighborhood, a world away from the gated mansions and garden palaces. John stared at the photo included in the report. Marina in jeans and a t-shirt, standing beside the mailbox, her hair pulled back, one of the boys holding her hand, while the other balanced awkwardly on a scooter nearby. The timestamp showed the photo was taken just 3 days ago. Below the picture was the official information. Their names, Leo and Ben Santos, born 6 weeks after Marina left. John's breath caught as he saw the names again. Santos. She had given them her last name. That small detail hit him harder than anything else. She didn't erase him. She honored him, even while keeping her distance. A silent acknowledgement, or perhaps a hope that one day he would find them. And he had. He closed the file and put his head in his hands. For a man who had spent his adult life avoiding vulnerability, who prided himself on control and calculation, he now felt completely unmoored. The truth was, he had walked the earth for 5 years with their face, living outside the walls he had built to protect himself from a life he once thought was too messy, too unpredictable. Children, he had once said, were a risk, a weakness, a liability. But now, all he wanted was to hear their voices, to see them up close, to know them. The guilt set in next, slow, thick, and inevitable. He had driven Marina away that night, 5 years ago. She had stood in his home and offered him something real, something lasting. And he had thrown it back at her, as if it meant nothing. He had thought he was making the smart decision, the logical one. Now it felt like the cruelest mistake of his life. The boys were almost 6 years old. He had missed their first words, their first steps, the late-night feedings, the tiny socks, the storybooks, and the scraped knees. He missed it all, and he would never get it back. As night fell, John was back in his car, parked 2 blocks away from Marina's house, watching from a distance. He knew it was irrational, almost obsessive, but he couldn't stop. He saw a light in the kitchen. He saw one of the boys press his face against the front window, yelling something as Marina appeared behind him. She smiled and scooped him up, carrying him away. A second later, the other boy appeared, running into view with what looked like a toy sword, chasing a cat down the hallway. John laughed softly, unexpectedly. It caught in his throat like a sob. He stayed there until the lights went out, until he was sure they were asleep, and only then did he drive home. But something in him had changed. This wasn't just about watching anymore. It wasn't just about knowing. He had to talk to her. He had to look her in the eye and ask why. He had to ask for a chance, not just for him, but for them. He didn't know if she would let him in. He didn't know what she would say, but the time for running from his past was over. He was going to face what he had lost. And if she let him, he was ready to fight for it. 2 days passed before John gathered enough courage to knock on her door. He had rehearsed 100 scenarios in his head. He had prepared himself for anger, for a closed door, even for the children to be hidden away as she refused to acknowledge him. But no amount of rehearsal could truly calm his heart as he stood on the worn wooden steps of the small home. It was so different from the world he lived in. No security gates, no polished marble, no glass towers looming over the skyline. Just a garden filled with sunflowers and a wind chime that danced gently in the breeze. The house felt warm before he had even entered. He knocked twice, then stepped back. His heart hammered like a drum against his ribs. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then he heard movement behind the door, the soft click of a lock sliding, the creak of hinges. When Marina opened the door, she looked at him with unreadable eyes. She didn't look surprised. It was as if she had known this day would come and had already accepted it. John didn't speak right away. He was too busy trying to memorize her face again. The subtle new lines near her eyes, the way her expression had become calmer, wiser. She was wearing a sweater with a faint stain on the sleeve, probably from the boys, and jeans cuffed at the ankle. She looked like someone who no longer lived for appearances, and yet she was more beautiful than he remembered. "Hello," he finally said. The word sounded small, almost ridiculous given all it carried. "Hello," she replied, her voice calm but wary. She stepped out and closed the door halfway behind her, leaving only a sliver of the living room visible. John noticed a pair of tiny sneakers on the welcome mat just inside. "I saw you the other night," he said, keeping his voice low. "At the event." "I know," she replied. "I saw you too." John swallowed hard. "Those are my children." Marina didn't flinch. "Yes, they are." The confirmation was like a shot to the chest. Hearing it aloud made it real in a way photos and instinct never could. He lowered his gaze, guilt flashing across his face. "You didn't tell me." "You told me not to," she said softly but firmly. "That night, when I told you I wanted to have children, you didn't just say no, John. You made it perfectly clear there was no place for them in your life. You were angry, cold, final. So, I made a decision. I walked out because I wasn't going to bring children into a home where they weren't wanted." "I didn't know you were pregnant," he whispered, almost too ashamed to meet her gaze. "No, you didn't. And I didn't want to come back just to be rejected again. I did what I thought was right for them." John nodded slowly. "I understand. I do. But I need to know them. Not as a guy looking from a car down the street. I want to know them. I want to try." Marina looked down at the porch steps beneath her feet. "They're happy," she said after a pause. "They don't know they're missing anything. I didn't raise them to feel incomplete. I gave them everything I could. And you? She faced him now. Her voice softened just a bit. You weren't ready then? Are you really ready now? I don't know if I'm ready, he admitted. But I know that I want to be, and that has to count for something. Her eyes searched his, and something shifted in her expression. Maybe it was the honesty in his voice, or the way he looked at her. Not like a man trying to regain control, but like someone who had lost something and had finally realized what it was. After a long moment, she exhaled. You can know them, she said, but not as a father. Not yet. They don't know you exist, and I'm not going to confuse them with something too big, too fast. You can be a family friend, someone they get to know naturally. If you're serious about this, if it's not just guilt or curiosity, then you'll take what I offer you, and you'll earn the rest. John nodded. The weight on his chest lifted enough to let him breathe. I'll take anything you give me. She hesitated just a second longer before she opened the door and stepped back. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and crayons. There were toys scattered on the rug. A children's cartoon played softly in the background. And then, two children peered around the corner of the hallway. One was holding a toy dinosaur. The other had a smear of chocolate on his cheek and a wide, suspicious grin. Boys, Marina said in a gentle voice. This is John. He's a friend of mine. He might come over sometimes, so be nice. Leo tilted his head, studying him in silence, while Ben grinned and waved with his dinosaur. Hello, John, he chirped. John's breath caught with an unexpected surge of emotion, and he knelt down slowly. Hello. That's a very cool T-Rex you have. And so the first brick was laid, not as a father, not yet, but as someone who was starting over, someone willing to start from nothing, with nothing but hope and the silent, urgent promise that he would never turn his back on them again. Do you think Marina's decision to let John into their lives is the right one? It was a Thursday afternoon when the past returned in the form of an unexpected email. John was sitting in his office, half listening to a call with his European partners, when his assistant forwarded a message marked urgent. The subject line was a single word, Herrera. John's blood ran cold. He hadn't heard that name in years. Marcos Herrera, Marina's old boss, the man she had walked away from quietly but decisively after leaving John. Back then, John only knew a piece of the story. Just enough to dislike the man, but not enough to intervene. Now, apparently, Herrera was back. And worse, he had discovered something he never should have known. John canceled the call without explanation and opened the email. It was from a legal contact, someone discreet, who had stumbled upon Herrera's name while working with a firm that had suddenly begun to collect information about John's personal affairs. Herrera had hired an aggressive, high-profile legal team, the kind used by celebrities in scandals or by corporate raiders. According to the report, Herrera had obtained copies of Marina's lease agreement, old medical records, and, most disturbingly, Leo and Ben's birth certificates. John's name wasn't on the documents, but it didn't matter. The resemblance was undeniable, and Herrera was making a move. He was threatening to go public with a story, a damning accusation that John had secretly fathered children, abandoned them, and was now trying to force his way back into their lives. It was twisted, it was manipulative, and worst of all, it wasn't entirely untrue. The truth was far more complicated than that, but in the court of public opinion, the nuances didn't matter. If this story broke, it would not only destroy John's reputation, but drag Marina and the children into a media firestorm they weren't prepared for. That night, John drove straight to Marina's house. His face was pale, his jaw tense, his entire body humming with the weight of what he had to tell her. She opened the door and immediately saw that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, stepping back to let him in. John paced the living room for a moment before he sat down. "Herrera," he said. "He knows about the boys, and he plans to go public with it." Marina froze. Her eyes widened with the kind of fear that goes beyond personal anxiety. This was maternal, primal. How? How could he know? "I don't know how far he's gone, but he's hired people. He has documents. He's crafted a legal narrative that paints you as the secret mother of my illegitimate children, that I abandoned you, and am now trying to reclaim them out of guilt. He's trying to ruin me and punish you in the process." Marina's face hardened. "He once tried to control me, and when I wouldn't, he made my life impossible. That's why I quit my job. That's why I moved without telling anyone. I thought I was done with him." John leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "You don't have to face this alone. I won't let him touch you, or the boys. But if this story breaks," she began, but John cut her off. "Then I'll go public with it first, with the truth." Marina stared at him. "Are you willing to admit everything? The boys? What happened between us?" "I spent years hiding behind control," he said, "pretending that having a perfect image matters more than having a soul. But I'm done with that. If protecting you and the boys means destroying the image I built, then so be it." 2 days later, John was standing in front of a line of reporters. The cameras flashed, microphones extended like weapons, waiting to strike. He wore no tie, no polished smile, just a simple suit and the weight of a man ready to shed the armor he had worn for years. The statement he read was short, direct, and unapologetic. "5 years ago, I made a mistake that changed the course of my life. I let fear dictate my future and walked away from someone I loved. I didn't know then that I was also walking away from my own children. What happened between Marina and me is private, but what I want to say publicly is this. I am the father of 2 boys, and I am proud of them. I will spend the rest of my life making up for what I lost. If you're looking for a scandal, there isn't one here. There is just truth, regret, and a man trying to be better than he was." The room was silent for a moment after he finished. Then the barrage of questions began, but John walked away from the podium, ignoring them all. The story went viral within hours, but instead of the outrage that Herrera had counted on, the public responded with something different: empathy, respect, and even admiration. The image of a powerful man owning his mistakes and choosing his children over his empire struck a nerve. That same night, Herrera tried to release his version of events through a gossip website, but failed. People had already chosen their narrative, and it wasn't his. Discredited, shamed, and legally outmaneuvered, Herrera backed down. He disappeared almost as suddenly as he had reappeared. John returned to Marina's house late that afternoon. She opened the door, her eyes tired, but filled with something deeper: relief, and perhaps even pride. The boys were asleep. The house was silent. John stood in the doorway, not saying anything at first. "You did it," she whispered. "I didn't do it for me," he replied. She stepped back and let him in. For the first time, there was no unspoken wall between them. The danger had passed, but something bigger had changed. John had chosen them, completely, publicly, without fear or hesitation. That night, as he sat beside Marina on the couch, their shoulders barely touching, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the kind you buy with silence or success, but the kind that comes from finally doing the right thing, no matter the cost. Do you think John acted out of genuine regret, or because of circumstances? And what do you think Marina will do now? The sun rose through a thin veil of clouds, casting a dull gold over Marina's backyard. John sat at the small wooden table on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in front of him, untouched. Inside the house, muffled laughter echoed from the hallway, where Leo and Ben were chasing each other with cardboard swords, already engrossed in a game of pirates that had begun before breakfast. It was chaos, but the kind that settled deep in the bones and felt like life. John wasn't used to this kind of noise, this kind of rhythm, where spilled cereal and mismatched socks weren't signs of disorder, but proof of warmth. He still didn't belong here, not fully, but for the first time, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to. Marina joined him on the porch with a soft sigh, pulling her sweater tighter. Her eyes were tired, but no longer cautious. The last week had been a blur. Reporters, statements, legal cleanup, some late-night phone calls to acquaintances who had promised to help keep the worst of the noise away from the children. But the noise was fading now, replaced by something quiet, something steady. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat across from him, studying his face for a long moment. "They're asking questions," she said softly. "Leo asked me last night why everyone thinks you're famous." John looked down at his mug and let out a breath. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were someone who used to think success was about being important to strangers, but that you're now trying to be important to the people who matter." A quiet smile touched his lips. "That's fair. And Ben wants to know if you'll take him to the Science Museum this weekend. He thinks you're the kind of grown-up who likes dinosaurs." "I am absolutely that kind of grown-up," John said, his voice warm. "I'll take both of them, as long as they don't try to ride the T-Rex skeleton." Marina smiled at this and looked away for a moment. "They're starting to feel safe with you," she said. "Not just comfortable." "Safe," John nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle inside him like an anchor. "I won't disappear from their lives. I want them to know that." "I know," she said in a low voice. "They do too, even if they can't say it yet." They sat for a while in silence, sipping their drinks and watching the garden sway gently in the breeze. Finally, Ben came running out the back door with a crumpled drawing in his hand, declaring that it was a map to hidden treasure and that they needed John to help them find it. Leo followed close behind, his arms crossed, already playing the role of the serious captain who had no time for nonsense. John rolled up his sleeves and let the boys drag him into the yard, where they spent the next hour digging imaginary holes and unearthing ancient gold in the form of bottle caps and shiny pebbles. Later that afternoon, after the treasure hunt had dissipated into naps and cartoons, John found himself alone with Marina in the kitchen. He was drying dishes as she prepared a lasagna for dinner, the two of them moving around each other with a surprising ease neither of them expected would return. It felt domestic, natural, and dangerous in the way old feelings creep in when your defenses are down. At one point, their hands brushed as they reached for the same spoon, and Marina stopped. The air between them shifted. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't awkward. It was just different. A pause filled with unspoken things. She looked at him. Really looked at him. And he could see how hard she had tried to build her world alone, how long she had protected herself and the boys, with a strength that deserved more than admiration. It deserved a partner. "You're different now," she said. Not as a compliment, just as a truth. "I had to be," John replied. "I don't want to be the man I was when you walked away. That man didn't know what he had, or what he was losing." She nodded, then turned back to the stove. "And now, what do you want?" John didn't answer right away. He put down the dish towel, moved over to the counter, and stood next to her. "I want a life I don't have to rebuild every time I feel empty. I want a family that doesn't have to be won with numbers or press releases. I want to sit at this table and be the one they tell about their science projects and their nightmares. I want to be more than a name on their birth certificates. I want to be their father, and I want to earn your trust again. Not because I'm trying to fix what I broke, but because I want to build something better." Marina didn't answer immediately, but she also didn't pull away. She looked at him, and this time, her eyes didn't hold that old caution. They held a question, maybe even a hope, that she had tried to bury for years. That night, they ate dinner together as a family. Not a broken family, not a patched-up family, just a real family. The kids talked over each other, spilling sauce on their shirts, laughing with their mouths full, arguing over who got the last piece of garlic bread. Marina caught John's eye from across the table, and he knew something had changed. It wasn't the finish line, or even the beginning of something new. It was the space in between, where love gets a second chance to blossom, not from perfection, but from honesty, patience, and the quiet, steady promise that this time, no one was walking away.